Hello, friends. Today I'm going to tell you about the insanely interesting Spanish psychological thriller 2022 year called The Crooked Lines of the Lord. What's going on, Alicia? Tell me, what are you doing here? Alice Gould, accompanied by an elderly man, arrives at a psychiatric clinic. The companion thanks the woman for her courage, and she goes to the entrance. The doctor checks the documents. They are in perfect order, including the husband's permission for hospitalization. A letter has been delivered separately for the director of the clinic, but since he is not in place, the envelope is opened by Dr. Rua Perez. This is a referral from her attending physician, in which he warns that the patient easily finds an excuse for any of her actions, even a lie. She turns over so that her interlocutor will not be able to find the truth, and the intelligence of a woman is so high that she easily deceives anyone, even a psychiatrist. The doctor is interviewing a woman. Alice insists that she was legally abducted by her husband so that he could take possession of her wealth. But the doctor has information that it was she who tried to poison the man 3 times, after which she was hospitalized. But if she's a poisoner, why didn't her husband turn her into the police? Only then he wouldn't be able to use her money. It turns out that a woman can tell the truth. Nevertheless, he is forced to state paranoia and asks the deputy director of Castel to escort Alice to her room. On the way, she conducts a tour of the institution. The new director of the clinic allowed patients to walk in the park and opened workshops, which has a beneficial effect on their well-being. Alice surrenders her personal belongings, including a lighter, but asks permission to take only 1 book with her. And Castel, after reading the title Paranoia and its Signs, allows it. The woman is examined literally from head to toe, gives out the form of the institution, and is advised to choose a simpler name. Taking her to her room, Alice instantly transforms and takes out the leaves and newspaper clippings disguised in it from the book. It turns out that she broke into the institution to find out how the son of her client, Dr. Raymond, who was a patient of this clinic, died. The actions are transferred to the moment when a fire broke out in the clinic one night. All the patients were released from the rooms. It was then that the body of one of the twin brothers, held in the institution, was found. In the present, Alice wakes up in her room and goes for morning treatments, and then meets her new neighbors in the dining room. One of them, Ignacio, seems perfectly normal, and he is even allowed to drink wine and have his own lighter. At this moment, one of the patients, a short man, obsessed with everything, climbs under Alice's table and scares her. Ignacio expels the disgrace, but his guardian, the elephant man, stands up to protect the baby. The couple goes out to the park, and Ignacio introduces Alice to the twin brothers Romulus and Ram, next to whom there is always a girl whom Romulus considers his sister, simply because he wants to. The action returns to the night of the incident. The police arrive at the sanatorium and find the murder weapon, a large piece of glass. Alice, in the present, again examines the letter she received from the client, in which an unknown killer blames her father for everything. The woman goes to communicate with patients and witnesses a clash between Romulus and the elephant man, who is hardly taken away by the orderlies. Meanwhile, Alice brings Dr. Caesar for testing. She easily passes him and flirts with the doctor. The plot returns to the night of the murder. The paramedics discover a broken window in the door, but to get to it, it was necessary to go through almost the entire hospital. It turns out that the killer had to set a fire to distract attention. The strategy is very well thought out, which is hardly available to an abnormal person. And again, the morning of the present, Dr. Caesar invites Alice for a cup of coffee and continues to ask questions. The woman distracts him with a question about his appearance, and he unexpectedly pours boiling water into Alice's cup. He is forced to give her the keys to the doctor's bathroom. A woman goes there and arranges a blockage. She runs out into the corridor, and while the archivist calls the cleaners, Alice finds extracts for the right year. It turns out that on the day the letter was sent to the father of the murdered man, only Ignacio was in town. The action shifts to the night of the murder. Traces of blood are found on Ignacio's hands, while a medical examiner's car drives up to the gate. Ignacio is being interrogated. He is the only one who has a lighter, which means that only he could have started the fire. But the man denies the crime. He's just the first one who found the body and tried to help. At this point, the investigator is interrupted. The medical examiner is not the one who usually comes, but the man is annoyed. He doesn't care who it is. Let him do the work. And again, the present. Alice asks Ignacio about the day he was in town. Did he send the letter? But the man suddenly begins to worry and starts running to the building. Alice delays him until a heavy downpour begins, and then Ignacio falls to the ground and convulses. It turns out that his disease is hydrophobia. And again, the night of the murder, the investigator is sure of Ignacio's guilt, But in order to get to the broken window, the man would have to cross the flooded corridor, and he would not be able to do this under any circumstances because of his phobia. At this point, the doctors realize that there is not enough one patient in the wards. In the present, Alice confesses to Ignacio that she entered the clinic with the permission of the director of the institution, who was a close friend of the father of the deceased guy. The men don't believe it, but he says that the deceased guy often fought with a dwarf. And by the way, on the night of the guy's death, the dwarf could not be found because he was hiding in the garden. Later, Alice sees the obscene behavior of the dwarf and sets off in his footsteps. The plot shifts back to the night of the fire. The director of the institution shares his thoughts with the detective. If a person is created in the image and likeness of the Lord, like an ideal text, then the patients here are curved lines that God drew when he learned to write, and he asks not to make the crime public because the killer is still in the clinic. And then the director is informed that the missing patient has been found. In the present, Alice is looking for a dwarf in the forest, but meets the twin Romulus. He's sure he knows who she is and is taking her home. A woman sees a wicker house in the thicket and is amazed at such a creation, and Romulus admits she's their mother. This house is for her. Alice is touched and hugs the guy, but then she hears a rustle and runs after someone, and the next moment she gets hit on the head, and the last thing she sees is a dwarf who is obsessed with everything piling on her. Later, Alice finds herself tied to bed, and Caesar announces that she has killed a dwarf. At this moment, the director of the clinic enters, who has returned from vacation ahead of schedule. Alice is delighted that they will finally be able to discuss her investigation and talks about her findings, but the doctor does not understand her. He has absolutely no idea what she's talking about. The woman tries to remind. They corresponded through the mediation of the father of the deceased, and the director himself told her how to get to the clinic, but he denies it all. Alice is outraged and intends to demand an explanation from the client. She tries to leave, but the woman is detained, given an injection, and sent to the punishment cell. 3 days later, Dr. Castel comes to her. She found clippings and notes in Alice's room. Alice tells her version and asks to convene a medical council. On it, Alice tells that she has specially infiltrated the clinic, and the director is aware of everything that is happening because it was his friend who brought her here. She remembers how she met the father of the deceased guy at the New Year's ball. She had seen his photo in the newspaper before when she watched the story about the death of his son. Then, the man asked for her help in the investigation and showed her a letter with accusations. According to the signs, the letter was written by a person with schizophrenia, and the clinic is just near the town from where he was sent. The rest could only be found out here. Then, he called the director of the clinic, and he allowed Alice to enter the sanatorium and even gave advice on simulating paranoia. Then, she persuaded the attending physician to sign the letter she had written and got her husband's confession by slipping him a form in a bunch of other bills. She said she was going to work, and the father of the deceased guy brought her here. She accuses the director of the clinic of incompetence because it was because of him that the unhealthy dwarf got freedom of movement. So she is not to blame for his death. The doctor breaks down, and this causes rejection among his colleagues. Alice reminds him that sooner or later, everything will be revealed, and then there will be a lot of questions for him. Later, doctors discuss what happened, and opinions differ. The woman's arguments look very weighty. We need to contact her husband and her personal doctor, but the director suggests remembering the poisoning of her husband. The first time she did it in a semi-club when she unexpectedly came to lunch. A month later, the attack was repeated after a dinner hosted by Alice. Moreover, when he became ill, she danced in the living room and did not hear calls for help. The husband had suspicions, and he remembered that he had seen Alice pour something into the food. Then he found a bottle in the closet and poured a few drops into her drink. When the symptoms recurred, he gave the vial to the doctor for examination. That's when she made up a story to get here. Her diagnosis is a fictional personality. However, Castel and Caesar insist on conducting an investigation, otherwise they will contact the police. Ignacio later admits that he saw the dwarf die. He himself fell and broke his head because he was afraid of Ignacio, who caught him trying to possess the insensitive Alice. At this moment, Alice turns her attention to the man who has been in the office since the beginning of the conversation. The director introduces him. This is Dr. Raymond, who is the father of the deceased, on whose behalf she allegedly acts. The woman denies that she was hired by the wrong person and demands to find a husband. But the man is unavailable, and the family doctor is at a conference in Zurich. Alice is electrocuted and locked in a cage. Being out, the woman seems to relive the events of recent times, but now she notices the barely noticeable signs of her husband. To the imaginary Dr. Raymond and the unnatural behavior of men, she understands everything was rigged, and she was the one at the center of the scam. She wakes up from the voices. Dr. Caesar allowed me to visit her. Ignacio and twin Romu came to support a friend. She tells the doctor about her suspicions. Her husband planned everything for her money. Her personal doctor left, and no one will be able to confirm her correctness. The woman offers to check her bank accounts, but for this you need to get to the bank, you need to convene the council again. Meanwhile, the director discovers that Alice has been transferred back to the ward, and Scissor goes to the police to file a kidnapping report. Castel searches the director's office and finds an invoice for receiving a large sum from Alice's husband. She is caught by the director himself, and the girl demands an explanation. The man admits receiving the money, but they all went to the clinic's accounts since it was a donation. He announces the dismissal of the girl and asks her to leave the institution. He himself raises the staff to search for Alice. Meanwhile, Dr. Caesar is refused to initiate a case because all the documents are in order, and no one can find a woman in the clinic because patients help her hide. She thanks everyone and asks for help to get out. She already has a plan and asks Ignacia to give her a lighter. At this time, Caesar goes to Alice's house and makes sure that her husband has not been home for a long time, and there is a woman's certificate hanging on the wall. She really is a detective. A toy workshop lights up in the hospital. At this time, Ignacio, overcoming himself, opens the water in his room and begins to scream from shock. While the orderly runs away for the doctor, the man opens all the rooms and encourages patients to come out. A panic ensues, during which Alice breaks the window and opens the laundry door. She finds the clothes of the medical staff and calmly walks to the exit of the clinic. At this time, Ignacio discovers the murdered twin Romulus. That's when the police arrive and the investigation of what happened begins. Alice approaches the gate, but stops. There is a medical examiner's car in front of them, and the woman asks to let her inside. She was called to examine the deceased Romulus. Hearing the name, Alice attacks the woman, changes clothes with her, and goes to examine the body of the deceased. An insensitive medical examiner is mistaken for Alice in the dark and informs the director that all patients are in place. But the detective identifies the woman, and everyone runs to the office, where Alice examines Romulus. She asks to be arrested, because now the police will have to deal with her case. Besides, she knows the killer. On examination, she noticed multiple injuries to the body, and this could only be done by a very strong person. In fact, it was Romulus who protected her from the dwarf, and the elephant man saw it. In addition, the elephant was unrequited in love with the so-called sister of Romulus, so he took revenge on the gung. The police examine the elephant man and find cuts on his hands. Alice declares her detention against her will. The director is against her leaving the institution, but the detective reports that they have checked her accounts and they are empty. Castel presents the director of the institution with a demand for his resignation, which was signed by all the doctors of the clinic. An extraordinary meeting of the board of directors is scheduled for tomorrow to discharge Alice Gould. Alice goes to the remaining twin, and then it turns out that it was not he who died, but his brother Rema. It's just that Rema was scared that night, and his brother left him in his room while he was looking for his sister. Alice comforts the guy and promises to visit him. Later, her things are returned to her, and she goes to the council. A woman easily answers all the questions of doctors. The director scornfully notes the unprofessionalism of his stupid colleagues who fell for her tricks and declares his dismissal. The medical commission unanimously votes for Alice's sanity, and at that moment, the man who brought Alice to the clinic enters the room, and this is Alice's personal doctor. He approaches Alice and asks what she's gotten herself into now, but the woman can't answer. A completely non-trivial move. A retreat into the future. A very complex and interesting plot. 2.5 hours fly by in one breath. Fans of detectives and psychological thrillers definitely watch.